The night before the announcement, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Neon signs blinked in slow rhythm, traffic lights shifted from red to green with a patience that felt deliberate, and somewhere inside millions of homes, phones rested on bedside tables like they were waiting to wake their owners with news that would change the mood of the morning. It had been quiet for a long time. Too quiet for a world that had learned to move to 7 familiar voices. When dawn came, it arrived with a whisper that turned into a roar. The word spread in waves, soft at first, then crashing into timelines and group chats with the force of a promise finally kept. The name BTS rose again, not as a memory, not as a rumor, but as a declaration of return. The era had a name that felt like a bridge between past and future, ARIRANG, a word that carried echoes of old songs and new beginnings. In a small apartment where morning light spilled across a cluttered desk, an ARMY blinked awake to the glow of her screen. The notification felt unreal, like a dream that had followed her into daylight. She sat up, heart beating faster than it had any right to over a few lines of text, and whispered the name of the era as if saying it aloud would make it solid. ARIRANG. It tasted like hope, like a story restarting after a long pause. Across the city, a cafe owner turned up the radio and smiled when the news slipped between songs. He remembered the first time their music had filled this room, the way strangers had become friends over shared lyrics and coffee refills. The return felt personal, even though it wasn't. It felt like the city itself had been waiting for the rhythm to come back. Inside a quiet studio, the air was different. Not tense, not nervous, but charged with the kind of anticipation that comes from standing at the edge of something meaningful. 7 chairs waited in a loose circle, their emptiness louder than any sound. Each space held a story of months spent apart, of routines broken and rebuilt, of silence that taught patience the hard way. When the door opened, the room remembered how to breathe. One by one, they stepped into the light, not as individuals carrying separate timelines, but as a constellation reforming after a long night. There was no dramatic greeting, no rehearsed moment. Just soft laughter, the kind that slips out when relief finally finds a voice. The return was not a performance yet. It was a reunion of presence. The name ARIRANG lingered between them like a melody no one needed to explain. It carried the weight of heritage, of journeys that begin with goodbye and end with return. The song that once traveled through generations now lent its name to a new chapter, as if to remind them that departures are not endings, and reunions are not accidents. They are rhythms of the same long song. Outside the studio, fans traced patterns of meaning in every teaser and shadow. A blurred image became a theory. A color palette turned into a prophecy. The fandom had learned the language of waiting, had turned patience into an art form. Each small hint felt like a gift, carefully unwrapped by millions of eyes at once. In another corner of the world, a night shift nurse checked her phone between rounds and felt tears press against her eyes. She had grown up with their voices in her headphones, had leaned on their lyrics through long shifts and longer doubts. The comeback felt like a promise kept not just by the artists, but by time itself. That even when life scattered you, something familiar could find its way back. Preparation took on a sacred quality. In the studio, notes were tested, harmonies found and lost and found again. Silence became part of the music, the space between sounds as meaningful as the sounds themselves. Each member carried new textures into the room, shaped by solo journeys and quiet growth. The group sound was no longer a return to what it had been, but a weaving of what each had become. The world outside waited with the particular impatience of those who had learned to wait well. Countdowns filled screens. Clocks became characters in the story, ticking with exaggerated drama. The era name appeared on banners, in captions, in whispered hopes. ARIRANG was no longer just a word. It was a horizon. On the day the first notes were set free, the city listened differently. Headphones went on in buses, in bedrooms, in classrooms where students pretended to take notes while their hearts kept tempo. The sound carried a familiar warmth, but it moved with new confidence, like footsteps returning to a path that had grown wilder in their absence. The lyrics did not explain everything. They didn't need to. They left room for interpretation, for fans to find their own stories inside the lines. Some heard reunion. Others heard resilience. Many heard the echo of their own waiting, folded gently into melody. Music had always been a mirror, and this time it reflected patience back to the people who had practiced it for years. Critics wrote about growth. Fans wrote about home. Somewhere in between, the truth settled into a simple shape. This was not a return to the past, but a step forward together. The era did not erase the silence that came before it. It honored it, turning absence into a prelude. In quiet moments between schedules, one of them looked out at the city lights and thought about how strange it was to be both ordinary and extraordinary at once. To walk into a convenience store like anyone else, then walk onto a stage where millions listen for the sound of your breath. The comeback did not change that duality. It made it feel gentler, shared again. The fandom found new rituals. Streaming parties felt like gatherings around a fire, digital but intimate. The first live performance of the era drew collective gasps, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The imperfections were proof of presence, of bodies in motion, of voices finding each other again in real time. As days passed, the era unfolded like a story told in chapters. Visuals deepened the mood. Choreography traced the shape of reunion in movement. Interviews carried laughter threaded with reflection, a softness that comes from knowing what it means to be apart. The world watched, but more importantly, it listened. Some fans felt older listening to these songs, not in years but in experience. They heard themselves in the pauses, in the steadier confidence of the sound. The music had grown with them, not ahead of them, and that felt like a rare kindness in a world that moves too fast. There were still doubts, still fears that the magic might not feel the same. But magic, they realized, is not a fixed thing. It changes with the people who hold it. The era of ARIRANG was not about recreating a moment. It was about honoring the long road that led back to the same place, now seen with different eyes. The city kept moving. New headlines arrived. Trends rose and fell. Yet beneath the noise, a quieter rhythm held steady. 7 voices had found their way back into harmony, not by erasing the distance they had traveled, but by carrying it into the music. In the end, the comeback did not feel like a single moment you could point to on a calendar. It felt like a season. A season of return, of listening, of learning how to stand together again without forgetting how to stand alone. ARIRANG became the name for that season, a reminder that every farewell carries the shape of a future hello. And somewhere, as the last notes of the day's playlist faded into the hum of night, a fan turned off her light with a quiet smile. The world had found its rhythm again, not because the silence had ended, but because the silence had taught the music how to come back softer, stronger, and more true than before.